Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Defenders of big tech often exclaim, if you don't like their platforms, then build your own. Well, on this edition of Crosstalk, we talk with some intrepid individuals doing just that. Against all the odds, will they succeed? To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined by my guest, Lee Camp in Washington. He is host of Redacted Tonight on RT America, as well as author of Bullet Points and Punchlines. In Cleveland, we have Taylor Hudak. She is a journalist and activist for free speech and a free press. And in Moscow, we have Suzie Dawson. She is co-founder of PanQuake.com. All right, Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Okay, let me go to Taylor first in Cleveland. A lot is going on online right now. We had right up to before the American election, we had essentially big tech colluding to crush a story that could influence the outcome of the election. Then we had after the election, we had the events of January 6th in Washington and Trump's ban from most platforms. And then we had another platform, Parler, that was gone, and it seems like it's kind of crawling back. Taylor, what is the state of what's going on right now? Because later in the program, I'm going to talk about a new platform that's coming up. And it's kind of, for me, it's kind of like WikiLeaks came into being because journalists wouldn't do their job, media wouldn't do their job. So others are thinking about challenging big tech because they're not keeping the promise of a fair playing field where everyone would be able to participate and all voices would be valued. So where do we stand right now? Because from what I can see, it's pretty dark. Go ahead.
Yeah, so all of this really kicked off when we saw President Trump removed from Twitter. And I want to make note that this is a huge disservice to the American people and to the public, because we do have a right to access public officials and elected leaders. And by removing President Trump from Twitter, Jack Dorsey effectively removed that ability to communicate with the president. Just on Tuesday, in fact, President Trump issued his last round of pardons. Unfortunately, Julian Assange and Edward Snowden were not among that list of pardons. And if Trump were on Twitter, perhaps he could have seen the massive call for Assange to be pardoned. But back to these platforms, they are communication tools and communication methods that our politicians do use, and we need to have access to that to speak with them. Now, Jack Dorsey also responded to his decision to ban the president and said that offline harm as a result of online speech is demonstrably real. Now, that is somewhat problematic because it's a very broad statement that can be applied to just about anything and any speech. And it also assumes a causal relationship between online speech and real world violence. And we've seen a rapid decrease in Twitter followings. And we have further evidence that this is just beyond Trump, because in a leaked phone call, Jack Dorsey, in fact, said that they will be removing more accounts. About 70,000, they said they will remove, and this will go on and extend beyond the inauguration.
The great purge here. Lee, it seems to me that platforms like Twitter and Facebook and Google, what they're doing is they're substituting their terms of service for the Constitution of the United States. I mean, they're above the law because they interpret it and then they will discard what they don't like. I mean, this is the public square. I mean, as I said in my introduction, if you don't like it, build your own. Well, they're monopolies and they make it very difficult for people to build their own, okay? And they're very devious about it too. So they went from having a great cause to just caring about the bottom line and power. Go ahead, Lee.
Well, yeah, a lot of people point out, the terms of service and that these are private companies. But in fact, we now live in a nation and to some degree a world that is owned by corporations. So the idea that these are somehow separate from the U.S. government is kind of laughable. Like you said, this is the public square now. We should have the ability to communicate without worrying that because we are saying something that goes against the corporate talking points that are allowable on mainstream media, we won't be banned from those platforms. Now, I know I have this crazy hot take that I believe that it is okay to ban people who have killed tens of thousands of innocent civilians. So that would include Trump or Hillary or, a variety of others, Obama, Pompeo. But that's not why they're doing it. If that's why we're doing it, then I might feel differently. They're doing it because statements that go against what is considered allowable in our, like I said, corporate media. And they purged, what, 70,000, they claim, QAnon followers, which, look, being wrong or incorrect is not a reason to take someone off a platform. I have many important and interesting conversations with people I disagree with. And instead, they are filtering us all into our tiny little bubbles of allowable thought. And it is not just a disservice, it takes us towards a dystopia.
Yeah, well, you shouldn't ban people for being stupid, okay?
Yeah,
that's
I agree.
And I just can't let this pass, Lee. If you're for war, you'll never get banned, okay? That is
right.
guaranteed, okay?
Exactly.
I mean, we'll get a blue check if you're for.
Right.
You know, Suzie, you're the co-founder of a new platform, PanQuake. Why are you doing this? I mean, there's these huge giants out there, and it'll be very difficult because of their censoring and control of the public sphere for people to even get to know who you are. Why take on this challenge? Go ahead.
Because it's absolutely necessary, first and foremost. Before deciding to build PanQuake.com, I spoke to a number of social media users across a broad spectrum of different generations and different types of people, different backgrounds, different experience, and different capabilities from a technical perspective. And I was amazed to discover that all of them had very advanced awareness and understanding of the ways that they are being manipulated and abused, really, by the big tech giants, the ways that they are being tracked outside of their browser pages, the ways that their relationships and communications are being mapped and commercialized and on-sold to big data companies, to corporations, to governments, and sometimes even to security agencies. And those users talk to me about their feelings, about the impacts on their personal lives and on their relationships. And they are feeling manipulated. They are feeling like they have a total loss of control. They are feeling like their relationships in the real world are being directly impacted and affected by the censorship in the online sphere. People spoke to me about their relationships in the real world being materially damaged. I had anecdotes of people talking about how their friends had been upset with them because they were no longer interacting with their content. Of course, that they weren't seeing their friends' content, which is why they were no longer interacting with it. But human relationships are fragile and brittle things. And unfortunately, the manipulation of what content we see is actually impacting the way that we feel about each other. It's impacting who we relate to, who we communicate with. And then that has real world effects. You just mentioned about war and how you won't be censored for supporting war. War is the ultimate manifestation of real world violence. And so to be able to advocate for war online is the ultimate example of creating real world harm. But I can tell you that the online censorship that the big tech companies are engaging in is itself resulting in real world harm across the board.
Yeah, Taylor, essentially what they're doing is they're deciding who can participate in public life. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, not only can they shut your voice off, but apparently now you can lose your bank account. You can't fly. I mean, this is a whole process of giving people you disagree with a scarlet letter, and they're going to have to live with it for the rest of their lives. They're banning people from participation in society.
Exactly. What we're seeing is Twitter, Facebook, and these other big tech platforms essentially acting also as publishers. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which was established in 1996, this was still during the early years of the widespread use of the internet. It stated that ISPs and other content providers could not be treated as a publisher and therefore are not held responsible or accountable for third-party content. It also ensures that no individual or person or platform specifically can be responsible for the speech of another individual. This also impacts bloggers as well. However, there is this Good Samaritan provision, which does allow for these private companies to moderate content. They can block and screen offensive content or harassment or anything that could be deemed even obscene. And this is usually laid out in the terms of service. Of course, we all agree to this. And also in Section 230, they cannot be held liable for taking any action in good faith to remove harmful content. But the problem here, in good faith, yes. So that's the problem here, is that Dorsey and Zuckerberg, though, they are removing content and removing users who are going against the accepted narratives. And that is the problem here. It's being abused. However, I also want to make note that the movement to repeal Section 230 is a very bad mistake, because while there is this protection that's being abused by these platforms and these tech giants, it's also important to note that if this were to be repealed, it's likely that these ISPs and these different tech companies are going to censor content even more, and probably not allow even third-party content to be on these different platforms, because it is unfeasible to actually moderate all of this content, because they could be held legally responsible.
Well, I think there's a lot of different opinions about that. They like the 230 cutout because it saves them an enormous amount of money and makes them completely irresponsible, and they will never be held account, and they get to pick and choose winners. Okay, I've heard plenty of arguments about amending it, and that's where I stand with it right now. But Lee, for me, what's so important here is that, you know, we have a legal system, a court system where you adjudicate grievances here. But why should I accept, and I do not accept, the ideological outlook of someone like Jack Dorsey or people over at Facebook? I mean, they're superseding what is called right and wrong. Well, we have a legal system, we have religion, we have customs to adjudicate that, and this is being all cut out. And you don't have no recourse. Go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, there really is no recourse. And, you know, the fact that they can ban you from these platforms, it's not just like, oh, so what? Someone, you know, doesn't have their Twitter anymore. So a lot of people spend a lot of years building these things up. It's like building a restaurant and then someone just bulldozes it and says there's no recourse. It really is, destroys careers, destroys lives, as Suzie was talking about. And these platforms they have an incredible amount of control. And as you're saying, they're deciding what is right or wrong, what's allowed to be said. They've even, besides just opinion, they're deleting things that are just news coverage, literally journalists trying to do independent journalism. Just the other day, a reporter was trying to cover a gun rally, not saying she was for or against gun control, just saying this is happening, and literally that gets purged from YouTube because you can't announce that the outside world exists for certain topics. I covered the fact that a doctor went in front of the Senate.
And after that hard break, we'll continue our discussion on the fate of the internet. Stay with our team. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about the state of big tech. Okay, let's go back to Suzie here in Moscow. Okay, tell us a little bit more about PanQuake, because how is it going to be different than the platforms that we're experiencing right now? Because the kind of echo some of the things that you said when you first answered your question is that all I hear is people complaining about how the hope of these platforms have been dashed. Okay, people are very, very frustrated, and it's creating a sense of anxiety. You know, will you be thrown off too? And if you're thrown off, why? And you'll never know why. You know, I have a very extensive online existence, and every day I'm waiting for something to happen because, you know, I do hold very strong views, and I'm willing to fight for those views, verbally, of course. So what is your platform? How is it going to be different than the ones that we have now?
I think the PanQuake.com differs from conventional tech products in almost every conceivable way, from no advertising to turning the user into our customer and building our entire product, designing our product around the needs of our customer, the user, as opposed to big tech, who consider the customer as the user to be the product, which they sell to the real customer, which is corporations, advertisers, government, security agencies. So first and foremost, the user for us becomes the customer, and our whole world is built around serving that user. That's everything from no cookies on our website, no tracking users, no collecting user information. You can create a PanQuake.com user account without submitting an email address or a telephone number. We do not capture any private information. We are not what is called in the tech world a client-server model, which means the user data goes from the device straight to the blockchain. We are not an intermediary. We do not store any of that information. Being a blockchain product makes us incredibly transparent because every user has a copy of the blockchain, which becomes a public record of the public information posted by the user, their content straight onto the blockchain. We will obviously be moderating our network. We're not going to allow child pornographers to use our network. However, when we moderate content on our network, every user on the network can see on what date, at what time, what user, what message was moderated by us, and for what reason it was moderated, which is just an amazing new world of transparency by comparison to Twitter or Facebook, who are moderating millions of messages without ever providing any real transparency around those moderation practices. We're solving 14 major issues with current big tech platforms. We are not shadow banning accounts. We are not jailing people in what Julian Assange called the filterverse of one, where the information coming into you from your friends and followers is being tailored or manipulated by the platform, and the information that you send out is with us is not being manipulated either.
Ask a question, Suzie. I suppose Donald Trump now is homeless online. Would he be welcomed on your platform?
Any member of the public who wishes to use our platform may use our platform, and provided that they are not engaged in active law breaking, they will not be moderated on our platform.
You know, Taylor, one of the things that it really irritates me, and I know the politics, Lee's politics, I know Suzie's politics, they know my politics here, but I bet you all of us together, relatively easy, could determine what should not be put online. I think that's common sense, more or less dictates what that would be. Okay, obviously, child pornography, not inciting violence when it's impending, where it's possible. Simple things like that. And I think it is relatively straightforward. And political speech, well, the political speech, if you don't like it, you should counter it with more political speech. See, what I don't like about these big platforms is they abhor debate. They just want consensus. And the consensus is what they think. I mean, when I listen to Dorsey and Zuckerberg in front of Congress, I mean, they're no moral superiors to me. Okay, I don't know where they get off on being, they're the mandarins of the universe. I mean, they're not. I mean, Jack Dorsey is an absolute fool because people are fleeing his platform right now. And I have to wonder, just got to get down to the dollars and cents of it, how many angry phone calls he's getting from his shareholders, because he's breaking the spirit of what we're supposed to be doing online right now, and he's in charge of that. He needs to go, and we need a serious rethink and have a decent conversation like we're having on here. We have very strong different political point of views here. Go ahead, Taylor.
Well, what is acceptable speech should not be determined by Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg, or the staff at Facebook and Twitter. And unfortunately, that's precisely what is happening right now. And there's a separate conversation to have in regards to illegal content. That's completely different than censoring information that they do not like. One of the things I found very disturbing this past year was Mark Zuckerberg openly admitting to interfering in the election in the United States. And he does so by working with a publisher. He was working with Reuters, as well as the FBI and the intelligence community, to prevent election interference. But that is actually election interference because they changed their policies and their behavior, and they were restricting content a week prior to the election taking place. And that is, in fact, censorship. And this is really problematic that big tech is working with the establishments, and I would say probably the establishment Democrats in particular, as well as the intelligence community. It's also a massive insult to the public because it suggests that the public does not have the ability to determine what is real and what is fake. And again, it is not the job of a state or a private company to be making these decisions.
Lee, one of the things that, I find really interesting is that if you go back to the founding of the United States, when the Constitution was being written, and the founders that I guess are not the most popular figures, obviously, with the left here. I mean, what they said to each other, about each other in newspapers, I mean, it was absolutely scandalous, okay? But the public was able to figure it out, okay? And they respected the public. And Taylor's absolutely right. Well, these big tech companies, they sneer at the public. They sneer at them, okay? I mean, canning the Hunter Biden story, I mean, that is such an insult to the democratic process as well. I mean, let the chips fall where they may, okay? They shouldn't be having an editorial decision about it, okay? And the lack of real reaction to that censoring of that story, I found really astounding, and it really terrifies me about the future if things do not change. Go ahead, Lee.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about the time of the founding fathers in the United States, the way of communicating was newspapers and pamphlets. And if there weren't pamphlets, if you could be jailed for handing out a certain kind of pamphlet, there would be no United States, which is basically what we're getting at. At least people can't hand out the digital pamphlets that they want to give out their opinions. Something else I think we need to discuss is why we've gotten to this point. It's because our ruling elite realized how dangerous it is for people to actually be able to speak to each other. It has created large-scale change over a relative short period of time. It helped create Occupy and Black Lives Matter and the Bernie Sanders movement and even Trump's movement. So they realized they needed to get it back in the box where they are in control. The corporate powers, the corporate elite are in control of the message, and they have worked very hard to do that. We're seeing, yes, banning nowadays, but the shadow banning, the suppression, the number of views that my videos can get is a tiny fraction of what it used to be. So this has been going on for years, but it's gotten much more extreme recently.
Yeah, well, all I can say is that they want this control, and they want it to be more stringent because they are completely incompetent, okay? They've run the country into the ground. They've run a good part of the world into the ground, okay? And they want to maintain that power, okay? Suzie, that's one of the things that I find really frustrating is that they talk about all of these ideals about, capitalism and the free market and all that. These people, this is tyranny, controlling the economy, controlling people's lives, controlling people's choices, okay? And the worst of all is that they can completely disappear you. I mean, that's an infringement upon your citizenship, in my opinion here. And particularly, and I don't want to get political here because we've been all nice to each other here, but that's primarily coming from the left right now. And I find that really disturbing, and we need to push back. Conservatives,
aren't the left.
All of us need to push back. I'm sorry, Lee, go ahead.
Liberals aren't the left.
Okay, great. Okay, all right. Liberals are not the left. Okay, yeah. All right. And conservatives, not the GOP. Okay,
there you go.
Go ahead, Suzie, jump in.
I think that the entire political spectrum needs to be represented for it to be a level playing field. I think that it's incredibly important and even formative experience, particularly for youth, to have access to different types of information from different perspectives, to be able to talk with people with different opinions and different backgrounds. I remember when I was in school, we would be asked to bring different types of media that portrayed contrasting opinions to study. I strongly doubt that's happening these days. I would think that type of media studies work would be considered threatening to the establishment as well. But it's important for giving people the ability to develop critical thinking skills. They must have access to information outside of a narrow silo such as being created for them by the big tech companies right now. And I think that we've just seen more than a decade of supremacy in the online space from the big tech companies, and we've seen more than a decade of incredible social turmoil and destabilization. as a result. And when I think back to the period when the internet was much more free in the 90s, in the early 00s, we didn't have the type of social destabilization that we have experienced since these tech companies have taken control. So I think that it's time to go back to the future. The internet and online conversation started out as being peer-to-peer before there was a web, before there was any of these big tech companies. Users connected to users and exchanged information with other users. There was no intermediary involved.
Tell our viewers in about 10 seconds, how can they find out more about your platform?
PanQuake.com, PanQuake.com.
All right, that's all the time we have. I want to thank my guests in Washington, Cleveland, and Moscow. I want to thank our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, Crosstalk rules.